Sox on 35th is next. Doors open on the left.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Coughlin, and welcome to the Sox on 35th podcast. We are back with another exciting episode covering your Chicago White Sox. As always, I'm joined by our panelists, Jordan Lazowski and Nik Gaur. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Got my first Sox math win in a long time this weekend. The haters have some problems going into this week. I am very, very happy about where I'm at with that right now. Other than that, beautiful in Chicago, can't complain right now.
Yeah, weather's been great. The baseball I've been watching, it's been really hit or miss. Feels like the team can either pitch well or score a lot, but not both at the same time. So hopefully that gets sorted out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an issue we ran into last year, but it's nice to see this team score runs, isn't it? Like, it's just like seeing runs put on the board, even when you're bad or even when you're sitting at 5-6. You feel a little bit better about it when you have an exciting offense. Jordan has definitely made an enemy of White Sox Twitter. But anyway, we have quite a bit to cover in the episode, as we will cover a little bit of that. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to check out Sox on 35th at soxon35th.com, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sox on 35th. All right, gentlemen, so we have to get everything out of the way right off the bat. The obvious elephant in the room. Every year we deal with the injury bug a little bit differently. Sometimes we get hit with it early. Sometimes we get hit with it a little bit later. Serious, non-serious. Sometimes guys getting scuffed up. It's a little bit different. Early on, we have Eloy Jimenez and Joe Kelly hitting the IL. Two guys that you really want to see have a bounce back type of season. We were also seeing guys like Yoan Moncada and Tim Anderson getting a little scuffed up out there. We don't know what the long-term outlook is for Moncada and Anderson. We do kind of have a timeline on Eloy and Joe Kelly. As unfortunate as it might be, we'll probably end up seeing them a little bit more towards May. But how are we feeling about the health of this team moving forward? Is this something we should be concerned about? Nik, I'll let you go ahead and start on the top of this. Yoan Moncada, a guy who's been really hot. Is this something with his injuries, with him sitting out against the Twins for the first game, is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely annoying in the short term. I think just because we're so used right now to seeing the White Sox lineup. I mean, we were so used to it last week and seeing it actually resemble the full-strength team, which is something you couldn't really say last year. So before we could even get too used to it, now, of course, people are dropping like flies. And it does happen. I mean, look at the Twins lineup from earlier today, Monday's game against the White Sox. I mean, they had like 3 of their actual starters in the game, and everyone else was injured. So it happens. As for Moncada, I think that when dealing with a back injury, especially, it's the same one he had in spring training, and back injuries very rarely go away as easily as other injuries. So I think the fact that it's flaring up is ideally not that big of a problem long term. I think that as long as he rests, maybe he'll miss the whole Minnesota series, maybe not. But either way, I think that it probably won't be some sort of thing where he's missing like a month unless he pushes too hard. I think that Andrew Vaughn also had a back injury in spring training, so I wouldn't be surprised if he has a flare-up in the coming weeks, just because by nature it's a back injury. That's what happens. So overall, I'm concerned, but not too concerned, because I just think as a White Sox fan, whenever somebody gets injured, our default state is concern, and that's totally understandable. But at the same time, I'm not sure that anything is too long-term for any of our players right now, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, the fact that it's not long-term is kind of the big key. But also, for me, the issue is that 2 of these 4 injuries were incredibly preventable. Joe Kelly's was sustained during the melee, whatever you want to call it, with Pittsburgh on Sunday. That was wholly unnecessary. And Anderson's occurred on a play that I would yell at a Little League team for displaying in terms of defense. That was horrendous today, and the most frustrating part of it is not that it costs a pitcher extra pitches, it's that it costs a guy potentially games, especially someone as important as Tim Anderson. I think that's probably more frustrating than anything else. Nik, like you said, they're shorter term, but 2 of them were very preventable. And for a team that tends to have struggles with injuries that maybe are less preventable, it's frustrating to have them down out of the count like this.
Joe Kelly, that's kind of thing with Joe Kelly, I think right off the bat that I thought when I first saw that he would be going to the IL was Is this a matter of usage? Because I don't know about anybody else, but when we were absolutely destroying the Pittsburgh Pirates on Saturday, I was a little bit wondering. I was a little bit confused on some of the decisions we were making out of the bullpen. I understand wanting to get guys up and get them throwing and stuff like that, but when you have a game in lock and you have a situation where we already are down our closer, I don't know necessarily how much I want to toss our high leverage guys into those situations. And Joe Kelly is somebody who I consider, with the way our bullpen's set up, is really a higher leverage guy. He's somebody that's going to need to be. He has that type of stuff. So that was my first thought. And then you end up hearing that he tweaked his groin running out of the bullpen, basically to stop Michael Kopech from killing somebody. So it was it's just something you kind of have to shake your head at, but luckily there's nothing serious here. Even the Eloy injury with the hamstring, hopefully, I said early May because I always like to just give a little bit of tentative time, depending on what they want to do for rehab assignments or anything like that. But hopefully Eloy is back sooner rather than later. His expected time right now is about April 19th, Joe Kelly being April 24th. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But yeah, you really don't want to see Tim and Yoan go down with anything serious because of just how well they've been playing. That's just kind of the short and long of it. And I'm with you, Jordan. A lot of very preventable stuff here, but it is what it is. It's early on in the season. Everybody's still getting their feet under them. Some guys played a little bit more baseball than others, whether they were playing, actually 3 of these guys were playing in the World Baseball Classic. So, maybe that has something to do with it as well. That's just kind of the nature of it. But yeah, I guess besides all that, besides the injuries, there's got to be some good, some bad and ugly. Obviously we're sitting just under 500. Not nearly as negative as I would feel most White Sox fans would be at this point in the season with us being under 500. Usually the sky is falling at this point. For some people it is. But I see a ball club that is scoring a lot of runs, a starting rotation that is struggling. But how are you guys feeling about it? What are some things, Nick, because I let you start the next point, I'll let Jordan take this one. What are some things that are just looking really good for the White Sox right now for you?
I think the offense looks awesome right now. I think hit or miss some days. You look through the first 11 games, they've really had just one bad game. Some really strong plate approaches overall. I think Tim Anderson's one who stands out in terms of his chase rate. Way down from not only last season, but his career numbers. That's important for a guy you want to be your leadoff hitter, for someone who you want to set the table. To show that sort of growth at this point in his career, that's incredibly important. Beyond that, one guy I do want to highlight, both for the offense that he's provided so far, and I think he's not getting talked about enough. Steve Stone mentioned him a bit on the broadcast on Monday. Yasmani Grandal tied for 6th in blocking runs, which is a new stat for Baseball Savant. So he is up towards the top of the league in terms of blocking runs. Framing runs, he's also 4 runs positive. He looks good behind the plate. And I think he got some crap early on for a couple pass balls here or there that were tough in-betweeners. But overall, he's looked really good. And I think, you can talk about the offensive approaches and things like that. But at the same time, he looks good behind the plate. And I think that's important to highlight because I don't think he's gotten much in the way of much positivity so far, especially from the defense.
Yeah, Grandal looks good behind the plate, and he also looks good at the plate. I think it's something people aren't really talking about. He's taking walks again. He's hitting for power, not quite. I mean, he had 1 home run, but he's hitting the ball hard, which last year his best contact was anecdotally, he hit a 95-mile-per-hour line drive once in a while. But now he's consistently back hitting, 100-plus mile-per-hour doubles and liners, and that's really nice to see. So overall, I agree with you. I think the offense is doing very well, and I like that you mentioned Grandal. I was going to if you didn't, just because he's the one no one's really talking about. I mean, Moncada, Robert Anderson, those are the main 3 who got off to really hot starts, and they're rightfully getting their due. But I think Grandal, even Andrew Vaughn a little bit, I like the patience he's showing. He's getting on base a lot, which is nice to see, and I think it's only a matter of time before the power starts coming too. So yeah, in terms of positives, that's definitely the offense is the main thing, and the last thing I'll add there is base running. I think that the fact they haven't been thrown out stealing a base yet is just really neat because they didn't even steal that much last year. And the fact that they're doing it a lot more this year, but also doing it so efficiently is really impressive.
One thing on Grandal, too, I actually found interesting. He's running a 400 BABIP right now. So obviously this is unsustainable. The fact that he's hitting 300 is unsustainable. But at the same time, his career number is 275, and that's with the shift. I'm very curious. I think Grandal, and there are good cases around the league, but I think he's a good White Sox case study in terms of what the shift restrictions or shift ban, whatever you want to call it, what that's really going to do to players who have been heavily impacted by the shift. I'm curious to see where that number ends up. It's not going to be 400, but I don't think it will be 275 either. I think it'll find somewhere in between. I think that'd be really interesting to look at the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the point that Steve Stone brought up, because I was actually listening to the radio broadcast today with Len Casper and DJ, and they were talking about Grandal for quite a bit. And one of the things they noticed, just kind of looking outside of the numbers and just kind of doing a little bit of the eye test, is Grandal just is a lot more aggressive at the plate. And him swinging at pitches maybe he wouldn't swing at in the past because he was more willing to take a ball. Whereas a ball that's maybe kind of hovering around the corner that's still in his wheelhouse, he's starting to swing at those just a little bit more with great success. And it's opening up what he can really do with kind of his sweet, like the kind of his range of motion when swinging, I guess. I guess that's kind of the hot spot in his zone, I guess is the best way I could put it. But I think there's really something to that, because I've seen a much more aggressive approach from Grandal at the plate, and I think it's paid off so far. It really has. You know, he's showing the natural power that he's always had, and I think while there is a benefit, and you know, obviously, Jordan, you've built an entire persona about the benefit of Yasmani taking walks, but I do think there is something to be said about him potentially taking less walks and having more opportunities to showcase his power, especially when he doesn't have a shift that he has to worry about. And I think that's why we're seeing him get these doubles and hard hit balls to the gaps, because, you know, he's taking a shot at it. You know, he understands his value as taking walks, but he also understands his value as being a power presence in the lineup, especially as a switch hitter. And I thought Casper and DJ made a great point out of that today. That was the first radio broadcast I heard from this year. Incredible stuff, as always, as is expected. I guess kind of going to my next positive, Jordan, I really hate to stick it to you here, buddy, but that Luis Robert take about him potentially batting seventh in the lineup, I don't know if that's going to be in the cards after the week that Luis Robert has had. And I'm not going to say it's almost directly aligned with the second you had that take, but it's certainly been quite the run for Luis Robert since you made that take.
But it wasn't. If you listen to, and I got hosed on social media because the whole podcast was not played. And that's just the nature of social media, being in a position where people are listening to your stuff. There can be some 30-second bad sound bites. And that was certainly one of them. My whole point was that he looked terrible in the Houston series. And I said, if this is going to continue, I am not comfortable putting him at the top of the lineup. Personally, this hot week didn't change much for me in terms of how I feel about Luis Robert. I think you still see it in Pittsburgh. There's an at-bat, I think it was late in Sunday's game, or maybe it was late in Saturday's game. Our pitcher throws two sliders off the plate late in the game. He swings through both of them. They're both clearly balls. Pitcher goes back, of course, to another slider, hangs this one just a little bit, leaves it a little bit on the plate. Robert gets a base hit out of it. If you throw a good slider there, he probably swings at it again. So, my whole point with all of this is that if you're going to be super uber aggressive, it's hard to put two of those guys at the top of the lineup. There's going to be the good and the bad that comes from putting Luis Robert there. Hopefully there's more good than bad. If there is, no issues from me. But him using right field, him working counts, him laying off tough sliders, he was doing that in San Francisco and Pittsburgh. You still saw those points where he reverts back and he doesn't have those strong at-bats, but you saw a lot more good at-bats in against San Francisco and in Houston, or in Pittsburgh. Because of that, it's fine to leave him at the top of the lineup in those cases. My whole point is that if you're just going to be this free swinging machine that just relies on pure power, it's not going to operate well in the long term. That was my only point. I still don't think he's disproven me. Maybe it was premature to say seventh. but I'm still not on board with 1 and 2 being Anderson and Robert. A hot week doesn't change that for me. I need a hot month, a hot 2 months, and a true change in approach. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, well, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm still not totally on board with the 7th. I feel like our producers did a great job showing my reaction on that clip. Got quite a few comments about that in itself.
And
but it's not. Go ahead.
I will say again, 7th may have been premature. I just don't necessarily agree with the idea of putting him second. Yeah, at the top of the list.
And I understand your just play devil's advocate here. Like, I understand your justification for wanting to move him out of that spot, especially with a leadoff hitter who's as aggressive as Tim Anderson. My only thought is just like I like, maybe I'm kind of the rare occurrence to this. Maybe this is going to be something that's clipped that makes me look bad, but like I really like Andrew Benintendi in the 3-hole just because of his ability to hit to the gaps. Like, I'm already kind of hitting that whole Benny in the slab setup because I think it's just perfect. Like, I really do think it is, because he slap hitters, they're considered bad or they're undervalued, but like when you have 2 fast guys on base and you can hit to the gap, you could potentially get one of those guys in. And I think that's a really good setup for offense, and I think that's why Grifol kind of has that setup the way he is. Obviously, it's Luis Robert, that's a lot of power at the 2-hole, and I understand that argument as well. And, I wouldn't mind seeing Yoan Moncada sneak there sometimes as well, because I think with the way he's been hitting and the fact that he can be a switch hitter, that definitely is a benefit to having that 2-hole, but kind of sandwich between 2 guys like that. But I think getting Luis Robert with the way he's playing right now, the absolute most at bats, I think is, until we see otherwise, I think it's the best. It's to your point. Until we see otherwise, I think with the way Luis is playing right now, I think we have to get him as many at bats as possible, and I think that's a lot of what Grifol is trying to do. Now, if he if those strikeout numbers continue to go up, if he continues swinging at bad sliders, yeah, absolutely. Then that's a situation where you have to hold him accountable. Obviously, we've already seen Grandal just from the beginning of the year, before he swung a bat the first time in the season, being put accountable because of how low he was in the lineup. But like, if he's going to continue to hit like this, and we start seeing a little bit better of an approach, like we're moving in the right direction, I'm totally fine with him staying at second. Not that you're wrong though. Trust me, Luis Robert swinging at low sliders drives me absolutely insane. I was going to say something a lot worse than that, but it drives me crazy too. But his upside is just nuts, and I think that's why Griffol's going the way he is.
And I think you just made my point. Like, as long as he's doing this, it's fine to leave him there. My only thing is, to your point, and more of a devil's advocate point. Yoan Moncada is just as hot, and maybe he's cooled off a little bit. To play devil's advocate, why not try and get him as many at bats as possible? Move him. I think we've tried to do that at 4, but why not put him at 2? I think that's why, and I think if you put together all of the lineups that we put together last week, I think Nick's comes the closest to kind of like what it would look like in an ideal sense. Because Moncada is hot, but also he puts together those good at-bats even when he's struggling. I think that's kind of the most important thing there. So,
yeah, for sure. I think that I like the theory of what Duke was saying, where, one or both of Anderson and Robert get on, and then Benintendi hits into a gap. I would like to see that happen, just because, not to rail on the guy too much, but not been impressed by Benintendi and all the ground ball after ground ball, and even the defense, like his routes on sinking line drives. Like, every time I'm like, oh god, he's gonna drop this routine catch, and he's catching them. But like, I don't know what it is about the route, just something that's just making me uneasy if he's having trouble picking up the ball. But before we move on to pitching, one person I also want to bring up, I know Duke wants to talk about him too, is Oscar Colas, because not only did he hit his first home run since we last spoke, but just overall, I think his at-bats have looked really good. You can see it, like, in the first week compared to now, he's getting a lot better at laying off of the pitches that pitchers want him to swing at, especially when it comes to, sliders at his feet or the high fastball. Like, sure, he's a rookie, he'll still have the occasional swing and miss, but it's not nearly as bad as it was at the beginning, and he's starting to flash his power. That's actually why I was so upset on Sunday's game when he sack bunted in the 7th inning, or maybe it was the 8th inning. It was late in the game, because the Sox were down by 1 run. So I mean, if you're playing for 1 run there, you're just going to tie the game, and you don't have all your best relievers available anyway. So why are you playing for one? But also, I wanted to see Koala swing the bat. I mean, you had, I think it was Sebi Zavala, and it was probably like Romy Gonzalez or another bench player after that. Like, I want Oscar to be the guy to try to drive the run in. You know, he has gap power at worst, and obviously we saw him hit a home run in that ballpark. So it might have been his own decision, you know, being a rookie and wanting to be a good teammate. I don't know if it was Griffel. I don't think anyone in the media asked him, or at least I haven't seen anything about that. But it was just something that I was a little disappointed by, because Oscar's hitting really well. I mean, even today against the Twins, his at bats look pretty good. He has hit a couple deep line drives again. And I'd like to see him maybe even bat higher in the lineup. I know he's usually 8th, 9th, but some of these lineups when core players are out, I think it's time. Like, if you want to bat him even 6th, like, go for it. He's hitting well. I think he's earned it.
No, I 100% agree, especially with the idea of bringing him up a little bit more in the lineup, especially against righties. If he's hitting, why not try to kind of build off that? You know, I said this a little bit in the pre-show before, just talking with you guys about it, but Oscar Colas genuinely looks like somebody who's been in Major League Baseball for a while. The only thing I have against him, and it's funny because we were just talking about Luis Robert with the sliders, is low sliders at his knees going towards him. It's, you know, it's tough. It's a very hard pitch to hit in baseball anyway, especially when you're kind of getting used to how Major League pitchers are starting to utilize the slider. You know, you can make an argument that the slider is one of the most, if not the most popular pitch in Major League Baseball. You know, pitchers have really kind of made a conscious effort to really try to perfect it. And, you know, that's kind of been the number one struggle for him. But besides that, like, he just looks like a seasoned vet in the batter's box. And that's what he looked like all throughout the minors. And, you know, not to dismay against the Gavin Sheets boys out there, but, like, I have a hard time justifying Gavin Sheets batting over, like, higher than Oscar Colas in a lineup for me, personally. Just because I see a lot more intangibles in what Oscar Colas is doing. He can hit it anywhere in the ballpark. He's not just strictly a pull hitter or anything like that. Whereas Gavin, like, if he's not hitting a bomb, or he's not hitting, like a random oppo hit or something like that the team isn't expecting, it's either going to be a flyout or a strikeout. And that's starting to become a little bit more annoying, and it's even worse when he's doing his best Bill Buckner impression at first base, but that's an entirely different issue altogether. But no, I agree with you 100%. I think Oscar Colas is quickly earning the praise he was getting before the season started, and seeing his approach already improve from that Houston series to now is showing that he's very coachable, and B, very understanding of what his issues are.
I will say one thing that there was an article early in the offseason, I believe, by James Fegan, where he went and basically said, you know, Colas is working with Gonzalez, and they're kind of learning, you know, if the slider starts at the knees, like, it's probably going to break out the zone, so don't swing at it. So seeing him start to self-correct that, kind of as both of you alluded to, while also still experiencing some of those rookie pains, is important. And I think, you know, you're going to see month and a half as he continues to develop. I think it'll be kind of exciting to see that happen for him. I will say, be careful how far you want to move him up in the lineup. That means you got to move someone down. And God forbid you move someone too far down, you're getting in trouble on Twitter. It's time for someone else to get called a nerd who's never watched baseball or something or some of those lines, whatever. Someone else's problem now, not mine.
I just want to say I'm glad I muted you a long time ago, Jordan.
So I've seen those types of things where it's like, I'm glad I muted you, or I'm glad something about not following me. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I have this opinion. You're free to disagree. You're free to clown me after a week of good at-bats from Robert. Go right ahead. If it makes you happy, go ahead. Guess what? I'll still be here next Tuesday, gracing your airwaves.
That's the only way to be, man. That's the only way to be. And, you know, I've dealt with similar stuff in the past. Nick, I'm sure you've dealt with it as well. Everybody, you know, like the Concourse Beggars Pizza on Twitter, you know, that guy, those types of accounts will always let you know just how horrible of a person you are in and out for saying Luis Robert should bat 7th. But yeah, I don't know. That's a whole different conversation. So now we've talked about a lot of the positives, and obviously the offense as a whole is a positive. You know, there's just There's no way around that. And even to your point about being careful about where you want guys to go in the lineup, like, we got a really good problem to have right now. Everybody's hitting. So, like, to a point, you almost don't want to mess with it because the whole line, well, besides Elvis Andrews, but again, that's a conversation that we've had before that really hasn't changed since. Unfortunately, Elvis has just been having a tough go of it, both offensively and defensively. But regardless, the offense as a whole is hitting the ball, and it's making everybody very, very excited for a team that could potentially really just become the Bridgeport Bombers again. And that's, I think, something we've all been waiting for, especially after getting singled to death the past 2 years. On the flip side, it's been a rough week for the starting pitching staff that's not named Dylan Cease. Like, let's be real. Mike Clevenger might get out of it a little bit because he had 2 pretty solid starts, but even then they weren't stellar. You know, they weren't anything that you are writing home about. What are you guys feeling? Nick, I'll let you go ahead and start with this one. How are you guys feeling about the starting rotation? Is this something that we should genuinely be really worried about? Is this something where we're just trying to get the kinks out? Like, we're giving up home runs at an absurd rate. We're giving up hits at an absurd rate. The defense isn't helping, but the pitching certainly isn't helping their case either, especially when they should know that the defense isn't playing fantastic. Nick, how are you feeling about the White Sox starting rotation right now?
Yeah, so my opinion, as you might expect, is that since it's so early, I think it's probably most wise to default to whatever projections you had before the season rather than like overreact too much to what's happened so far, which means that it's been a really, really bad stretch, but at the same time, I don't think it's indicative of some crazy trend where we're going to have the worst starting pitching in baseball. Like, I think it's just a really bad coincidence that this stretch is happening right now. That being said, there are still some very real concerns that, are valid for pretty much every starting pitcher on the staff other than Dylan Cease. And of course, Clevenger's looked pretty good, but like you said, Duke, especially the last outing in Pittsburgh, he was kind of walking on a tightrope at times, getting out of trouble. As for the other 3, I think given that he looked a lot better in Pittsburgh, it's pretty clear that Michael Kopech was indeed tipping pitches against the Giants, which makes sense because especially early on in that outing, he actually looked really good. I love the way his changeup looked. And then, of course, it all fell apart. So good to see him bounce back already. And then as for Giolito and Lynn, those are 2 increasingly polarizing players, honestly, in terms of the discussion that I'm seeing, just because Lynn obviously has been very good in his White Sox career, but fastball-reliant pitchers, when they lose speed on their fastball, predictably they don't pitch as well. And because he's getting older, I understand why after 2 starts, even though, he said he was under the weather, the most recent start, I understand why people might think that it's the beginning of the end. That said, he's not going to be, like a 7 ERA pitcher or what, I don't know. Yeah, I don't even look at his numbers this early because they're meaningless. But like worst case, I think Lance Lynn is going to be like a competent number 4 this year. Like, he might not be an ace, but even if he loses speed on the fastball, he has improved off-speed stuff that he started showing last year, and that'll help him. As for Giolito, maybe I'll leave that one for Jordan because I have no idea what to make of him this year. I keep seeing stat after stat showing how his stuff is way better, his fastball is way better, his changeup is back to its like 2019 to 21 shape, yet the results aren't there. So I don't know what to make of him.
Let me start with this question. I'm actually very curious about how you would answer this. If you were to say, just split quick decision, worry more about Lynn or Giolito, who would you worry more about for this season?
That's a good one. I'd probably go Lynn purely because of age and because, like I said in the past couple episodes, I think Giolito, with the contract year and with just knowing his work ethic in general, I think chances are he'll at least be serviceable this year. But Lynn, I think just the red flag being age, it's hard to say that I'm less worried with him, if that makes sense.
Duke?
So when it comes to both Lynn and Giolito, see, I kind of like being a problem solver. I kind of have an idea of what their issues are, both of their issues are, especially Lucas right now. I think it's something that can definitely be fixed. I guess I would have to say I'm a little bit more worried about Lance, just because he's been having a difficult time changing up his speeds with his different fastballs. He hasn't been mixing it up as much as I would like to see. That's something I feel like he's going to start getting going a little bit more. And I want to see that occasional have Steve Stone jump out of his seat, Lance Lynn curveball every once in a while that I just haven't been seeing yet either. Because, it's just that kind of thing to keep everybody off their, off kilter. But I would say Lance, just because, like Nick said, age, I think that plays into it. Lance has not been the same since he got injured last year. Whereas Lucas, I don't think it's anything physical with him. I think he's just genuinely missing his spots, and it's making it harder for him to set up what he wants to actually do. And he gets to points where I don't think he knows what to pitch, and that's where he runs into issues.
I genuinely did not think that was going to be unanimous for Lynn. Because I agree, it's Lynn. You look at each of the guys, you go real quick one by one. My answer is also Lynn on that one. Lynn, so far, looks like both the fastball, the velo and the movement on his fastball and cutter are both down. When the movement's down, that's when I get a little bit more concerned. Giolito's getting so much praise from metrics because his fastball is similar now to the fastball velo of years past. It's back up on average over 93. I mean, a lot of people are talking about if he's not hitting 96, 97, he averaged a 94.2 in 2019, 94 in 2020, 93.8 in 2021, 2022 was 92.6, now it's back at 93.2. That's more trending towards career norms. That's why it's like he needs this 96, 97. I don't know what they're talking about. He's never, he'll go there once or twice with it, but on average, he's never been at his best a hard thrower. So when you look at his pitch, it's yes, so the velo is getting back closer. The movement in terms of vertical break, how much it rises, quote unquote, or doesn't drop essentially. It looks more like his 2020, 2021 fastball. That's encouraging. Changeups moved the best it's ever has, horizontally at least, and the slider looks good too. The stuff looks good. Duke, to your point, it might just come back to command. The only thing is that fastball spin still isn't in there. So we knew he's probably a sticky stuff victim. I think that's still fair to say. It's about getting it back to that more natural number of maybe 2,200, 2,250 RPMs. He's still a little bit below that. That's my biggest concern there. Clevenger looks like the fastball slider guy he was before. Kopech, the slider remains my concern, getting more horizontal movement on it versus just being purely vertical. I think if he's going to throw it at the speed he does, it needs to be more horizontal. If he throws a little bit harder, like Cease does, you can get away with that vertical break being the main thing. And Cease, there's not much to say so far. He'll get the hate for 5 innings today. Watch a ball game before you watch a box score. Other than that, I think that's why I was very surprised we all agreed on Lynn versus Giolito. Giolito, it does feel, Duke, like you're saying, that there's still an aspect of it that it needs to be better placed, like it was before, where if you're not going to reach back for more than 95, 96 just once in a while, that's how you end up getting it.
Well, and to really kind of hone in the issue, because I didn't totally explain what it was with Giolito. In my opinion, it is definitely command of the fastball, but with that, and I thought Steve Stone made an incredible point about it. And Steve knows pitching. Nobody can ever take that away from him. When you're not able to really locate that fastball and pitch, and hitters are going to start expecting you to stop throwing it, they're going to start sitting on that changeup because they know that's the pitch he can control in his sleep. And that's really where he gets gashed. When he can't control his fastball and guys aren't biting at it, he will start going to that changeup heavy and batters will start sitting on it, and that's when shit's getting hit over the wall. That's as simple as it is. And I think that's an easy fix. Control is never an easy fix per se, but once he's able to control that fastball, everything else will come into place. And even with the Michael Kopech point, I do see a trend with him going to that slider a little bit more often than he did last year, and I think that's something that's very positive. His changeup, when he goes to it, looks absolutely disgusting, and I really think that's something that he needs to continue to mess around with. The control's not necessarily there yet, but that movement, oh my goodness. Just a gross changeup. It's almost like a variation of his curveball, just with the way it freaking drops.
I see you drooling over this changeup. My God, Duke.
I am. Hey, you get worked up. You get worked up by your boy Lucas Giolito, which, by the way, you brought up sticky stuff, man. He might find you in the parking lot for that. But I am a guy who can definitely admit I am a huge fan of Michael Kopech. Seeing him pitch against Pittsburgh was the Michael Kopech I expected. Showing good high velocity in his fastball, showing good command. Got in a little bit of trouble here and there, but he worked himself out of it. That one run is very hard for me to put on him, especially with the way the ball was played. But that's just kind of one of those things. Of course, that would be the day that we don't score any freaking runs, would be the Michael Kopech redemption start. But it's neither here or there. But regardless, with Michael Kopech, we have to also address the elephant in the room there with him tipping pitches in his first start. That's something that's obviously going to get worked out. Hopefully that's something that he's making more of a conscious effort to. Didn't seem like he was tipping against Pittsburgh. I don't think I've ever watched his hand in his glove more in my life, personally, especially with after watching highlights of that first game and being kind of having an inkling that maybe he was, but John Boy really did a great breakdown to show us all that, yes, he absolutely was. But yeah, no, overall, I'm not worried about the starting rotation, and I think any issues we're seeing, there's fixes, and that's always a positive of it. It's not a situation where we're looking at like John Danks when he was towards the end of his career, where it's like, I don't know what this guy could do to possibly redeem himself at this point. Like it's just not there anymore, and I don't see that out of any of these guys. Even Lance, he can get crafty. He's always been crafty. Even if the velo goes down, as long as he changes speeds, he can make it work. Lucas, like I said, it's control. Clevenger, honestly, I wouldn't mess with much that Clevenger's doing. I want him to kind of keep rolling with what he's doing and just kind of get his confidence going. And honestly, if you get what you get out of Clevenger every fifth start, as long as we're scoring runs, it's not the worst thing in the world for a 5-starter. And Dylan Cease is Dylan Cease, and anybody who thinks Dylan Cease isn't Dylan Cease is, I don't know, I think you deserve to get roasted on Twitter. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not too worried.
And I think the obvious question then is, when do you start to worry? My answer is probably late April. If this really hasn't turned around by late April, the Sox are already out of it anyway. So that really doesn't matter. I think the one other thing, a very good point you brought up, Duke, about not, in regards to Giolito, not moving away from a pitch. That's why Dylan Cease was able to keep the game under control against San Francisco, where he clearly didn't have a slider or his curveball, but he kept throwing it. Like, until you just keep throwing it, and maybe they mentally turn off the idea of swinging at that pitch at all, then you break off the good one that stays in the zone, and then you get a free strike or a free out of it. Not moving away from certain pitches, and it goes along with Kopech too. When he was tipping, Ethan Katz goes out. They clearly say, hey, they got our signs, or you're tipping. We don't know, but it's clearly on your off speed, or your curveball rather. So just stick with fastballs. The next hitter figured that out really quickly after 3-4 fastballs, then hit one out of the park. Like, you can't rule out certain pitches, even if you think they got it, or you don't think you've got your best stuff that day. As soon as you do that, you turn from a 2-pitch pitcher to a 1-pitch pitcher, or a 3-pitch pitcher to a 2-pitch pitcher, and you make it so much easier for hitters. I think that's really, really good point on your part, Duke.
Yeah, you always just got to keep them on their toes at the very least, and that's what I liked about season that start. One thing that would have been perfect had we recorded this episode like on Friday or Saturday is there was a time when I was checking on Fangraphs, and the White Sox as a full team had the highest batting average on balls in play, BABIP, in baseball on offense and as on pitching. Meaning that the offense, I mean, again, I don't love BABIP for an individual metric, but as a team, if you're number one in baseball in both counts, it probably means that your offense is going to get a little worse and your pitching is going to get a little better. And we recorded this episode today, and we've had back-to-back games where the pitching has been a lot better, and the offense has been terrible. I mean, they won today, but it hasn't been scoring the way it has or collecting hits the way it has either. So we're already seeing some stuff start to normalize, and that's why I said at the outset of this segment, like, yeah, it's not fun to watch the White Sox pitchers get absolutely destroyed on a daily basis, but it was also never going to sustain. And it's nice to see that it's already starting to converge toward the norms. Now, hopefully, you can't just rely on that. You need improvement from pretty much everyone, again, aside from Cease. But I'm confident that it's like on paper still a very good rotation when healthy, and if they stay healthy, which honestly for the starting pitching, they actually don't have as high of injury concern, I think, as the rest of the team. So if they can't stay healthy, I'm confident they're at least like a middle of the pack rotation.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a lot of reaction to 10 games worth of samples. Numbers jump up and down drastically each day. I know fans hate when you're like, oh, it's only April, it's only the first 10 games. But it's like when you're looking at statistical like highs and lows and just you have to wait for that stuff to normalize. Just from a pure mathematical standpoint, you have to wait until the extremes are kind of evened out. And to Nick's point, that's exactly what we started to see the past couple games. It's too early to start worrying, especially when you're talking about extreme numbers.
Yeah, it's not like we're dealing with like a Dallas Keuchel in the rotation right now, just an absolute stinker who has looked bad for a while. It's all right. These guys got stuff they're working out of. I think people forget that Dylan Cease in his first spring start looked absolutely awful, and he's just looked great since. Michael Kopech looked great in his first start as well in the spring. So these are just things that they're just kind of getting that consistency down, and it's not something I'm necessarily worried about. But as far as, and kind of moving into our next point of teams we should be worried about besides ourselves, we were talking about everything we should be happy about with the White Sox, everything we should be worried about with the White Sox. We should probably talk about who we're worried about in the AL Central, because while we're sitting third, obviously, as we've discussed, the White Sox being 5-6 certainly isn't the end of the world, especially with us just absolutely hammering baseballs as it is right now. And we just played the Twins on Monday and squeaked out the first one of the series. Hopefully that ends up playing out the same way throughout the course of that series. But I will let Jordan actually start with this point. Who are you worried about in the AL Central as far as really competing with us all the way throughout the season?
Guardians, simple answer. I think when you talk about the Twins, or excuse me, you talk about like extremes normalizing, the Twins have been extremely good on pitching, unsustainably good. Kind of the same way the Sox have been unsustainably bad. It'll all even out. Of course, pitchers make improvements. I'm not saying that the Twins haven't made improvements. I'm saying the drastic levels to which they're at right now are unsustainable. I don't think the offense is overwhelming. Cleveland just drives me nuts, and even as they continue to lose starting pitcher after starting pitcher after starting pitcher, I don't want to see them with a season series with a divisional playoff on the line. That is a frustrating team to play baseball against, because it's a brand of baseball that is hard to defend against. It's very lucky, but at the same time, it's very hard to defend and play and game plan against. And that's why I will always answer that question, as long as they're competing, as always going to be the Guardians for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like that you mentioned that they're losing. They obviously lost Tristan McKenzie, and now Aaron Savali as well recently hit the injured list. So at least to acknowledge that, because I'm going with the Twins, and part of my reasoning is because the Guardians' rotation is getting injured, and frankly, they're the kind of team where if they lose a position player, they actually have a lot of top 100 prospects that are position players, but their pitching depth, at least from what I understand, is not as great, at least not in the immediate, AAA wings. So I'm concerned about them, and I hate playing them. They're frustrating, yes, but this year I'm more afraid of Minnesota still, just because while I agree that their pitching has been unsustainably good, it's still a good staff. And like I said in a recent episode, just because it's a bunch of number 2 starters doesn't mean it's a bad staff. Like for the regular season, that's really good. It just means they may not make a deep playoff run. So I think that they're a team actually that's built to do really well in the regular season and not really well in the playoffs, especially given the injury concerns with Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa. But overall, I'm going to stick with them. This Twins team that we're seeing this week is not the real Twins team. I mean, that lineup is just absolutely decimated even compared to ours. So once they get their full lineup back, assuming they do, that's a team that I am more afraid of, just because I think they're trying to hit for a lot of power, and that's something that the White Sox have struggled with so far as a pitching staff.
Yeah, you don't worry about the Guardians pitching staff until they pull a random bagger from the local grocery store and turn him into Cy Young. So you don't worry until that happens. But I get the point. It's a fair point. I think it's fair to look at the Twins and be like, oh, yeah, that's a better squad than I think I give them credit for at the same time. It's very easy to say that as well.
So I guess my opinion on the Twins over the last 3 years is just really, and this isn't me divulging too deep into maybe what they actually produce once they're on the field, but just looking at it from a GM mindset, I don't quite know what the hell the Minnesota Twins are doing with the way they're building their roster. It feels like at certain points they're trying to get young, and then they bring an old aging players. And then when it feels like they're trying to compete, they end up moving those aging players and try to go young again. It's like, it's just been back and forth, and I don't quite understand what they're trying to do. And then when you add on the fact that a guy like Byron Buxton has not played in the field at all yet this season and is looking like he might be the DH, that's alarming. That's like Joe Mauer levels of alarming if I'm a Minnesota fan. Also, and this is completely unnoted, but their uniforms look awful in my opinion. I think they look like the freaking Minnesota Orioles, which is just hilarious to me, because I thought they had a pretty good uniform setup back before. But I don't have it in me to really buy into what the Twins are doing. I don't think they have the firepower in the lineup compared to a team like the Guardians. Like, let me just say some names here, because this is the Guardians lineup today with their starting pitcher: Juan, Rosario, Ramirez, Naylor, Jimenez, Bell. That part of the lineup right there is horrifying. I don't care what pitcher I have on the mound. I don't care if I have Dylan Cease on an absolute heater. That part of the lineup is horrifying. And I just don't see that with the Minnesota Twins. And, they say what you say about Tristan McKenzie getting injured. Once he gets back, I think he's going to really kind of pick up where he left off. He's not someone who necessarily focuses too much on velocity as much as he really does his pitches. And you have a guy like Shane Bieber who just can be flat out dominant at times, And I mean, I will give the Twins this. They do have some fireballers in their bullpen, and I think that's why you really need to get to their starting pitching so you don't have to deal with their high leverage guys. But I do think, just as far as a team that can keep up with you offensively, Cleveland scares the crap out of me. And I think that's the team that I'm really, as far as a 162 season goes, not basing it on really anything they've done, so either team has done so far. It's got to be Cleveland for me. It's got to be. But yeah, no, I thought you guys both made really good points. Honestly, Nick, you kind of made me a little bit scared about the Twins there for a second. If we hadn't just beaten them today, I would been a little nervous heading into the series. But I don't know. I think Buxton not playing in the field right now is alarming as hell. Like, he's been having so many injury history in the past anyway. And who's that guy they just got from New York? Not New York, L.A. The guy we were going to sign, the big
Gallo?
Gallo.
Yeah, Gallo.
Yeah.
That's a guy that doesn't really instill a lot of fear in me either, because that guy can't even hit for an average. Like, sure, maybe he'll walk and maybe he'll get, hit the occasional bomb, but man, he just has looked like an absolute shell ever since he's left the Rangers. And I just always get a kick about the fact that Michael Kopech was starred around the trade package for us to potentially get him back in the day from that horrendous Twitter account. But anyway, I feel like this is a good point for us to wrap up, because I'm talking about Twitter beef, and we've talked about more than enough Twitter beef at this point in the episode. But ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have this week for the Sox on 35th podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to check out Sox on 35th at soxon35th.com, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sox on 35th to stay up to date with your Chicago White Sox. This has been Duke Coughlin, joined as always by Jordan Lazowski and Nik Gaur. We will be back next week as we cover another exciting week of White Sox baseball. Thank you, and go Sox!